Aggressor by Andy McNab, read by Stephen Pacey. Monday, the 5th of April 1993. The three of us clung to the top of the Bradley armoured fighting vehicle as it lurched over the churned-up ground. My right hand was clenched round an ice-cold grab handle near the turret. My left gripped the shoulder strap of my day sack. We'd flown 3,000 miles to use this gear, and there was nothing to replace it if it got damaged. Our Bradley was the only one of the 4 AFVs carrying an SAS team, but night sun searchlights were mounted on all 4 and were strafing the front of the target buildings. Charlie, our team leader, gave Half-Arse and me the shout to stand by. Seconds later, our AFV slowed, then came to a halt. We scrambled down the sides, taking care our day sacks didn't strike anything on the way. The vehicle swiveled on its axis, mud cascading from its tracks, and headed back the way we'd come. I joined Charlie and Half-Arse behind a couple of cars, and we hugged the ground, looking, listening, tuning in. Our AFV was now grinding along the other side of the building with its mates, night suns working the front of the target. And now they were a safe distance from our eardrums. The loudspeakers mounted on each vehicle began broadcasting a horrible, high-pitched noise, like baby rabbits being slaughtered. They'd been doing that for days. I didn't know how it was affecting the people inside the target, but it certainly made me crazy. We were about 50 metres from the rear of the target. I checked Baby G. About 6 hours till first light. I checked the gaffer tape holding my earpiece and that the 2 throat mic sensors were still in place. Charlie thumbed the pressel hanging from his black corduroy bomber jacket. "This is Team Alpha. We clear to move yet? Over." He was talking to a P-3 aircraft circling some 25,000 feet above our heads. Bristling with thermal imaging equipment to warn us of any impending threat while we were on the job, it also carried an immensely powerful infrared torch. I checked that my 1-inch square of luminous tape was still stuck on my shoulder. The aircraft's infrared beam was invisible to the naked eye, but the reflection off our squares would stick out like sore thumbs on their camera. If we were compromised and bodies poured out of the target to take us on, at least P3 would be able to direct the quick reaction force to the right place. The reply from the P3 came to my earpiece too. "Yep, that's a free zone, Team Alpha, free zone." Charlie gave 2 clicks on the pressel and began to crawl. He'd know that I was second in line, with Half-Arse bringing up the rear. Half-Arse was going to be the eyes and ears, while Charlie and I worked on target. The crawl was wet and muddy, and my jeans and fleece were quickly soaked. 6 minutes later, we were where we needed to be, a point between 2 ground-floor windows. A utility box the size of a coal bunker was set against the wall. It was an ideal location for the stuff we were going to leave behind. Fingers shielding the lens of his mini maglite, Charlie opened the utility box and had a quick look inside. Half-Arse had his pistol out. He kept his eyes on the windows and his ears everywhere else. He'd had a buttock shot away during an op a few years back, and right now I wondered if it meant his arse was only half as cold as mine. We knew that everyone in tactical operations in the various pods would be watching the thermal and IR imagery of us at work, beamed down to them by the P3. Charlie had worked out where he wanted to fix the device. He pressed a thumbnail into the wood at almost ground level and gave me a nod. I eased the day sack off my back and brought out a pyramid 7 inches high and made of alloy. Instead of a peak, it had a hole, and at each of the 4 corners was a fixing lug. Guided by the beam from Charlie's maglite, I positioned the pyramid so the hole was directly over his nail mark and held it there while he put a battery-powered screwdriver to the first lug. Very slowly, very deliberately, with all the precision of a neurosurgeon, he proceeded to insert a listening device into the wall of the target building. It took over an hour of painstaking effort before Charlie was ready to connect the microphone to the lithium battery and lay a metre-long wire antenna on the ground. As soon as the power was switched on, I could hear the microphone rustling in my earpiece. Then I heard a woman murmuring to her children and a man moan in agony. It must have been the one who'd taken a round in the stomach during the first attack. Charlie closed and relocked the utilities box as I dug the wire into the earth and smoothed it over. As we started to crawl back to the Bradley, voices echoed in my earpiece. A man mumbled passages from the Bible. A child whimpered and pleaded for a drink of water. We'd done our bit. Now it was time to hand our toys over to the Americans. 2 weeks later, and the 100-odd men, women and children in the target were still on the receiving end of the relentless screaming, like babies being slaughtered, taped on a loop and amplified 1,000 times through the AFV's loudspeakers. I unzipped my sleeping bag, slid my arm out into the cold and pressed the illumination button on Baby G. It was 5:38 a.m. I kicked the bag next to me. Day 51 of the siege. Welcome to another day in paradise. Anthony stirred. They're still playing the same bloody record. He groaned as he adjusted position. Tony wasn't used to sleeping hard. He belonged in a freshly starched white coat back at his lab, and he wasn't at all happy about what was happening here. Once we'd fixed the listening devices, nobody was interested in the Brits who'd been sent to Waco to observe and advise. Charlie and Half-Arse had flown back to the UK. I'd been told to stay and keep an eye on Tony. The Americans might still want to use the box of tricks he'd brought along. I looked through one of the bullet holes in the side of our cattle trailer. AFVs were circling the target buildings like Indians around a wagon train, night suns bouncing wildly. The compound, as the feds were calling the Branch Davidians' hangout, comprised a mishmash of wooden-framed buildings, 2 large 3-story blocks, and a large rectangular water tower. All of a sudden, the ear-piercing, gut-wrenching screams stopped. The silence was deafening. Then one of 3 or 4 AFVs clustered together near the car park lurched forward, ploughed through the fence, and kept straight on. I gave Tony another nudge. Look at this. They're crushing all the cars and buses. As soon as the last vehicle was flattened, the AFVs spread out, and the animals' screams boomed out again from their loudspeakers. People were on the move outside our trailer, making their way to and from the array of shower cubicles, toilets and food wagons that had sprung up on our patch of the 77-acre tented city. There was no shortage of bodies to be catered for. The place was teeming. No fewer than 4 pods were sprinkled around the compound, Alpha Pod right next to our trailer. What's more, a rock festival-sized audience was gathering. Hordes of vehicles lined the road the far side of the cordon. The rubberneckers were coming from miles around for a good day out. There was even a funfair. David Koresh and his fellow Bible bashers couldn't have known what they were letting themselves in for when they resisted the original attack by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms almost 2 months ago. Tony was one of the 9,000 or so eggheads employed by DERA, the Defence Evaluation and Research Agency. You didn't ask these guys exactly which of the 80 or so establishments up and down the UK they worked, but I was pretty sure he wouldn't be a complete stranger to the germ warfare laboratories at Porton Down in Wiltshire. The RAF had flown a big container in with us, and Tony carried the keys. The FBI had been pretty keen to have access to Charlie's siege surveillance devices, but the inside of Tony's head was what they really wanted. A flurry of shouted instructions belted out of Alpha Pod's command tent. Special Agent Jim D. Bastendorf, call me Buster, was tuning up for his morning gobbing-off session to the new shift commanders. It had taken us no time at all to christen Bastendorf Deaf Bastard, then Bastard for short. Bastard was a Texan, which meant that everything,